once upon a midnight dreary, while you ponder weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volumes of forgotten lore, dare you delve deeper into the abyss of the unknown? Welcome, dear listener, to a realm where shadows whisper secrets and the veil between reality and nightmare thins. As you navigate these twisted tales of darkness and dread, let the chills that dance along your spine be a testament to the macabre delights we unfold. If these stories ensnare your imagination and haunt your dreams, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. For the more who join our dark descent, the deeper we can plunge into the eerie abyss together. And remember, as you turn off the lights and let the darkness embrace you, true terror lies not in what you hear, but in what you fear. Good evening, my disciples. Today's story comes from John Vogt from the Little Shop of Horrors podcast. I hope you enjoy. Giovanna. The text. I love sleeping next to you again. That's what the screenshot of the conversation read. It came from another guy's phone. A guy that she claimed was just a friend. Someone who I had drank beers with at a tailgate for a country concert. Come to think of it, they did seem awfully friendly that night. It's amazing how we can just discredit things we don't want to see as truth. Other people had noticed it, and they tried to warn me about her. I didn't care. She was beautiful, and I loved her. I loved her so much that I was cleaning up the apartment that I had just moved out of so that I could be closer to her. I had already signed my lease about a month ago. At the time, things were going so well between us, and this move was supposed to make the transition for us moving in together easier. But she was apprehensive, and now I can see why. I didn't see it coming. I didn't want to see it coming. Of course, I called her the second I received these texts from him. She denied it and said she could explain, that it wasn't what I thought. What else was I supposed to think? She cheated. She betrayed my trust. She broke my heart, and I was about to move right down the street from her. A daily painful reminder of the mistake that was this relationship. Profile set up. A few months had passed, and I had surprisingly settled in nicely. Sure, the first 2 weeks were rough. She would reach out from time to time, just to see if I'd reply, treating me as if I were some kind of backup plan in case this endeavor fell through. After he blocked my number on her phone that he paid for, it was finally done. I'll admit, I was in shock that I had been so ignorant for so long. Love is a crazy thing. I thought I would be the one to change her. Some of our mutual friends kept me updated on her situation in the weeks that followed. It wasn't going well, and I'm not gonna lie, there was a part of me that loved to hear that. The guy she left me for was a controlling and abusive asshole. Not to wish ill on anyone, and I would never say I'm perfect, but I'm not that guy. At least I knew I wouldn't have to deal with her anymore. She moved across the state to live with him. Anyway, it was summer 2017, and I still hadn't seen anyone since the breakup. I mean, I'd seen people. I just hadn't attempted to go on a date. That breakup lingered with me for a while. Still gets to me every now and then if I let it. But finally felt as though I was ready. Initially, I met my ex at the restaurant we worked at together. With the service industry having such a high turnover, there's new prospects every few months. But the kitchen I worked at now only had 11 total employees, including the owners. Dating another coworker was definitely off the table, so I had to look elsewhere. Believe it or not, trying to date non-service industry people while you're a chef at a restaurant is essentially impossible. All of my friends were transitioning, if they hadn't already, to a more regular 9-to-5 schedule. I found myself seeing them less and less. When I did, it was usually as the third wheel. There just didn't seem like there were many opportunities to meet people with the way things were going. So, I looked online. I know, it's still kind of frowned upon to look online. Meet people the old-fashioned way. That's the problem with your generation, my dad told me. It wasn't like I hadn't tried. I just figured I'd look at all my options. One thing was for sure. I wasn't going to pay any money for a membership to one of those sites. It asked for all the basic information. After I finished filling all that out, it asked for my interest. This part was confusing. Should I put down what I was really into? Or do you put what's more appealing? I was 28, and I honestly didn't have many interests. What guy didn't like watching movies or going out for a nice meal with some drinks? I loved playing Xbox, but I figured that would be a turn off. I had recently started going to the gym, but that's what most newly single people did after a breakup. My trainer told me, breakups make bodybuilders. I finally finished putting down my interest and what I was looking for in return. Now it came time to pick a picture for my profile. I was terrible at selfies, and most of the pictures I did have were of my ex and I. But I was able to find a somewhat recent picture of me at a friend's picnic. Save changes, the screen asked. I clicked save and started browsing my potential suitors. Giovanna. A month had passed since I tried my hand at the online dating scene. I'd been on a few dates, but they were all one and done. Most were just a dinner or a quick drink somewhere involving a lot of forced conversation. I tried not to let it get to me. I just wanted a chance with someone I was attracted to. Most of the women I'd seen in the past month weren't exactly what I was looking for. They just happened to be the ones that said yes. I wasn't even convinced half of them were serious about dating. But that didn't stop me from sending them a message to gauge their interests. And then she messaged me. She was beautiful, and her name was Giovanna. She looked well outside of the range of anything I thought I'd ever be able to date. We talked for a little while, and she disclosed that she was new in town. She was from Brazil, so her English wasn't great, yet. Giovanna was definitely flirty. It almost felt like a joke. Like I said before, I'm not exactly a 10 out of 10, maybe a 7 on my best day. Girls like that have never looked in my direction, much less openly flirted with me. We decided to go on a date. She didn't have a car, so I would have to pick her up. I lived about a half an hour from the city, so it was decided we would just walk around my favorite neighborhood, and I would show her some spots. And that's exactly what we did over the coming days. Things seemed to be moving quickly with Giovanna. I'll be honest, I never thought I could have such a connection with someone, considering there was this language barrier. Her primary language was Portuguese, after all. Mine was Yinzer, but if I tried hard enough, it could pass as English. She was perfect, a few inches over 5 feet tall, with light brown hair and green eyes. Giovanna would stop any man in her tracks. For some reason, she kept choosing me. I had a hard time with this. This wasn't the first time I had scored out of my league, so to speak, but it hadn't worked out so well for me before, and I was nervous that I would get hurt again. I'd overthink long replies between texts from her, easy to do when you've been cheated on or lied to. But we'd always clear the air, and she was incredibly understanding of my situation. I was falling for her. Hard. Too fast? Too fast. The hair ties were on the sink, along with the strands of that immaculate light brown hair of hers, but I didn't care. I knew it felt too soon, but Giovanna had practically moved into my apartment. She was there 5 or 6 nights a week. I soon discovered that she was a morning person, and she soon discovered I was not. But her dancing around in nothing but an oversized t-shirt while she made us breakfast made it easier to deal with. Things were going so well. We had both shown each other more of our world. I showed her old Pittsburgh by taking her to the Strip District, which was easily my favorite neighborhood in the entire city. The streets were always lined with vendors of all sorts. It was the one place in the city where you could grab a jersey, some bargain produce, and eat some pierogies while being serenaded by various street musicians. I must have passed that Ecuadorian street vendor a dozen times over the years. It wasn't until I saw her light up that I realized I had to try it. It turns out I really love pupusas. This neighborhood, it really captured the personality of the city. Not that I had to worry about it anymore, but if I did, I felt like I could fill out an interest portion of a dating app a little more than I could a few months ago. Giovanna brought her sense of adventure with her. Everything was fun for her. It was intoxicating. She was intoxicating. Life was exciting again, and I had her to thank for that. Over the past few weeks, we'd agreed on trying to become more active together. A lot of couples move less once they're comfortable with one another, but she suggested we do the opposite. After all, what was the harm in some self-improvement or a healthier lifestyle? We had really taken to hiking some trails somewhat local to Pittsburgh. Since we enjoyed hiking and doing some outdoorsy type things, we agreed on investing in some camping gear. Giovanna had urged us to join this backpacking group she found on Facebook. I had never been backpacking. We had always just car camped. Not actually camp in my car, but the type you could pull up to a campsite. My parents went to that same one every year for Labor Day and for Memorial Day weekend. I remember not liking the heat. It sucks getting cooked in your tent the second the sun hits it. But with fall coming in the next few weeks, hopefully the weather would be more bearable. We went to a locally owned store outside of the city that offered some premium gear at secondhand prices. The stuff wasn't perfect, but it beat buying cheap imitation gear. If there was one thing I was taught, value is everything in life. Spend money on things worth spending money on. $1,000 may seem steep for some camping gear for 2 people, but we were assured from some other, more experienced campers that we actually got a pretty good deal. The only thing we had to do now was settle on where we were going to do this. The hike. The nice thing about backpacking is that you don't really have to abide by any strict rules. There weren't any obnoxious campers nearby or overpriced firewood to buy from the camp owner. You really could just do whatever you wanted. Now the drawback was having to haul every single thing you thought you might use. in the woods however many miles with you. Typically, when backpacking, you were headed to a very remote area, making a cell phone essentially useless, aside from taking the occasional picture. Did you have enough food? Would there be enough water, or a way to obtain more if you went through it faster than planned? Would there be enough water, or a way to obtain more if you went through it faster than planned? Luckily, Giovanna and I had agreed on joining an experienced group for our first time out in the wilderness. There's always a learning curve when trying something new. Still, the stakes were higher this time. The forecast had called for weather in the upper 40s at night, which, if you weren't properly prepared, could kill you. But we were assured that we had more than an adequate setup to make it through the weekend. Gary had been thorough in his checking of our stuff. He saw it as his job as our unofficial guide, and he didn't want to have anyone's blood in his hands, so to speak. Purple Lizard Seekers was the name of the Facebook group we had joined. It was a group of backpackers that would buy these maps and seek out these really cool places that weren't typically on most hiking trails. Gary had put up a poll in the group on which spot we would go to next. And almost unanimously, this is what was chosen. It must be worth seeing then. Whether it were beautiful views of waterfalls or vistas, these had to be earned the hard way, with the hours or even days of hiking and camping. I'm not even entirely sure how Giovanna came across this group, but I was thankful nonetheless. It was only a few hours away from Pittsburgh, in the wild and wonderful state of West Virginia. The address we had was a gravel lot next to a rather unknown trailhead. I wouldn't say we were late, but we were the last couple to pull in. A row of open hatchbacks lined the gravel lot, as our fellow backpackers put the finishing touches on securing their gear for the hike. Gary was hard to miss, in his mid to late 40s, but looking much younger. The towering man with his long hair seemed to be cut out for this exact lifestyle. He was like something from another time. After Giovanna and I had gotten assurances from Gary and some other group members, we locked the car and made our way through a narrow opening in the thicket. The terrain, while more challenging than we were used to, wasn't really terrible. I'm sure Gary could have hiked this destination much faster without us. But he was understanding, and honestly, really encouraging. Before long, the group had exchanged pleasant niceties for heavy breathing, as we all tried to mask how out of shape we were. The nice thing was, we didn't have to fight cobwebs or anything on the trail because of the cooler weather. That was easily my least favorite part of hiking. I'm not sure how far away from the cars we were when we finally found the clearing, just outside of the wood line. I had lost track after being easily hypnotized from the winding trail of rocks, roots, and dirt. I looked at my watch, and we'd been hiking for over 2 hours. I will say, I was happy for the break. Giovanna seemed eager to continue, but it was no secret she was better prepared for this than I was. The backpack made it a little more difficult, adding 50 pounds to what I already had to carry naturally. Jobs were handed out to make life easier for everyone. The more experienced campers could set up their stuff by memory. They probably laughed a little, watching me fumble around trying to remember how to put together this hammock. Giovanna, on the other hand, seemed to be excelling at this. Her tent was set up, so she had time to help me with mine. Some folks had already been tasked with gathering firewood for the group, while Gary and the others went to check out a nearby waterfall. It wasn't Niagara Falls by any means, but I'm sure it beat listening to cars driving down the road as I tried to fall asleep. The glow from the coals was the only light around for miles, as the clouds had enveloped the forest. Everyone had agreed to retire to their beds after a night of exchanging horror stories, whiskey, and other herbal vices. I kissed Giovanna before climbing into the hammock. She kissed back, hard. Unfortunately, we weren't exactly in the place where we could do that. She giggled and left me to try and go to sleep. She knew what she was doing. Women can be so cruel. A cool breeze washed over me as silence fell over the camp. I laid there thinking of how a year ago I would have never even considered doing anything like this. Now, I'm in the middle of the woods surrounded by a bunch of strangers with nothing more than some fancy nylon to protect me from the elements. It's crazy what love does to you. I'm not exactly sure how much time had passed, but I had this sinking feeling that I was the only one still awake. I began to wonder if I would even be able to sleep, as I kept hearing noises in the distance. Vista. For some reason, waking up with the sun wasn't as bad out here. It felt natural. Eventually, whatever was stirring around in the woods settled down for the night, long enough for me to at least get a few hours of sleep. Gary made it clear that we should pack up and get moving earlier than later. We still had a few miles to hike to the vista, and the more daylight we had to enjoy it, the better. Giovanna looked as beautiful as ever. The sun reflecting off her light brown hair really brought out the green in those eyes. I still wasn't sure what she saw in me. No reason to dwell on any of that. We had breakfast to make, and that camp wasn't going to pack itself up. I started packing up my hammock, while she got the water going for our dehydrated meal we planned on splitting. After breakfast, I finished helping her pack while the rest of the group fastened the remaining gear to their packs. A few of their members made their way to fill up some communal water bottles from the creek nearby. Not long after, it was time to leave. This time of year made hiking tricky. The weather was cool in the morning, which made it smart to wear layers to stay warm. But about a half a mile into our hike, I couldn't wait to shed some. Gary's pace had quickened since yesterday. I found it harder to keep up with the group. Maybe it was the lack of sleep catching up with me. Regardless, I had to keep going. Giovanna seemed to be unfazed by anything so far this weekend. It was great seeing her so happy. I truly didn't realize how much she enjoyed the outdoors. I'm not sure anyone realized how much they would enjoy something like this until they try it. It's so easy to get stuck in the rut that is the daily grind, working all week just to sit in traffic or wait in line at the grocery store. Was that living? No, this was living. At least that's what I told myself as I struggled to breathe while climbing this hill. A few hours had passed since we had left camp, with minimal stops along the way. But after miles of cutbacks that led us towards the ridgeline, it seemed we were finally there. The crisp air accompanied by the warm sunshine made for the ideal weather out here. Gary stopped the group so he could further instruct where we were headed after this. I was very okay with soaking up as much of a break as I was allowed. A large stack of rocks propped to the right of our path marked a side trail. I stared an essentially vertical climb through the thick pine forest, wondering to myself, is there really no other way? Our enthusiastic leader assured us that the payoff was indeed worth it. That last stretch felt like it took an eternity to end. Around every bend awaited another. Our knee-to-chest climb was only made harder with our packs on. But we finally made it. I don't remember anyone talking to one another for a few minutes. A very large clearing in the middle of some pine trees was the stage for our next campsite. There was a makeshift fire pit in the middle with some wood left over from the last campers. Beyond the tree line that surrounded our campsite was a wall of rock. Gary suggested we set up camp sooner than later so that we may fully take in the view that awaited us on the other side of that rock. So, we did. I felt a lot more confident this time around setting up my home for the evening. Giovanna was still faster, but it wasn't embarrassing this time. Reaching for the bottle of whiskey that we brought, she pulled me toward the rock wall like a child eager to hop on an amusement park ride. Part of me was concerned that we hadn't stuck around and awaited our plan from Gary, but the other part of me didn't give a shit. We had been blessed with a cloudless and unreasonably warm day for this late in the year. Why not take full advantage of it by soaking in the views? We did exactly that. After carefully hiking through corridors of rock, we squirted out to an opening that led to the vista. It was clear once we arrived that you wouldn't need to proceed to the end to truly appreciate what we were looking at. The light blue tint that fell over the distant mountains suggested that we could see at least 100 miles in any direction. The edge of the world beckoned. With my beautiful Brazilian girlfriend in one hand and a bottle of whiskey in the other, we happily obliged. I was beginning to love my new life. Foam. When you're on Earth's time, you really begin to understand how menial the day-to-day of everyday life truly is. Most of the group had joined us after the camp was set up and the fire was started. How we got away with not pitching in, I'm not sure, but no one seemed to mind. The shade from the trees had taken the place of the sun as dusk began to fall over the valley. Giovanna had agreed it was probably time to make our way back to camp for some dinner. Navigating the rock wall corridor after that whiskey on an almost empty stomach proved to be challenging. But we made it back and wasted little time getting our food going. Just then, we heard a scream from someone at camp. Giovanna and I looked in the direction it was coming from, only to find one of our fellow crampers bleeding from the eyes. Gary ran over immediately as Ryan collapsed to the ground and began convulsing. A red foam poured from his mouth. Was that blood? Gary tried to calm him down, but it was to no avail. He stopped moving. The unnerving yet unmistakable sound of a death rattle shook us to our core. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. 1 minute, Giovanna and I were on the edge of the world, enjoying each other's company and the world around us. The next minute, I watched somebody's trip come to an end in a horrific fashion. Panic spread through the camp as others came from where we just were. What the fuck had just happened? What do we do? There was no signal, and we were miles from being able to call for help. Our fellow campers were visibly shaken by this, but Giovanna seemed to stay calm. Gary, too. By this point, I had sobered up pretty much entirely, and it was safe to say I didn't have an appetite anymore. Gary and some of the other seasoned backpackers discussed the idea of hiking back to the trailhead in order to call for help. The rest of us were tasked with what to do with a fucking dead body in our camp. Everyone was on edge. No one had any idea what caused it. Was it contagious? Were we next? Gary gathered the group. He calmly said that he had elected to go, alone, in order to call someone for help. He assured us that we would be in the safe hands of Andre. Aside from Gary, he was probably the most experienced outdoorsman in the group. But the question on everyone's mind, though, was what to do with the body. Gary suggested that we move it toward the rock corridor that led to the overlook. It was far enough away from us that we wouldn't have to stare at it anymore. I doubt anyone would be sleeping tonight considering what we had witnessed. Daylight was fading, and Gary made it clear he needed to leave. The group wished him good luck, but it was clear the mood in the camp worsened with him departing. He was our calming presence. I had only known him for a day or so, but I really did feel safer with him leading the way. With Jerry gone, Andre called upon me and the 3 remaining guys at the camp to move Ryan's body. Giovanna came over with a bandana she'd been wearing, so I wouldn't have to touch the body with my bare hands. I couldn't believe I was about to do this. As we grabbed an end to move the body, what air was left in his body came out in an unsettling sound. We all jumped back in horror. Andre instructed us just to get it over with. It was maybe 20 yards from camp, but it felt much further. I threw the bandana in the fire after I was done with it. Giovanna practically ran over to me with hand sanitizer she brought along. Trust me when I say I was tempted to use the entire bottle. But what if this was contagious? What if we had to move another body? What if they were all dead by the time Gary returned with help? Stop it, I thought to myself. This was no time to spiral thinking of worst-case scenarios. The group was very quiet and almost standoffish. The air was thick with some sort of tension. People were afraid to breathe too loudly or act any way other than normal. Meanwhile, Giovanna and I huddled together near the fire. The temperature had dropped almost immediately after the sun dipped behind the mountains. Before we could let our thoughts get the better of us, we heard some muffled coughing coming from Casey's camp, almost as if she were trying to conceal it. We froze, not used to the cliche of hearing a pin drop in the woods, but that's exactly how it felt. We stared, all of us waiting for it to pass. Casey stood up after her minor coughing fit and tried to explain it away as a bug flying into her mouth. None of us bought it, but before we could react further, she began to laugh. Andre shone his flashlight on her, revealing blood pouring from her face, her eyes, her nose, her mouth. None of us knew how to react as we stared at the mountain's next victim. Our worst nightmare was coming to fruition. Casey's laugh turned maniacal as she began flailing her arms about dramatically. Giovanna gripped my arm tightly as we watched the scenario unfold. She was incredibly strong for her size. Before anyone knew what to do, Casey sprinted past us in her blood-stained shirt. She was heading towards the opening where Ryan's body was. Wham! The sound of her skull being crushed from the impact was almost deafening. In her madness, Casey had run head first as fast as she could into the rock wall that surrounded our camp. Our innocent backpacking group was now witness to a woman ferociously bashing her face off of the rock in front of her. With each strike against stone, more and more blood soaked the area around her. Casey continued to do this until she physically couldn't anymore. Her body slumped to the ground near Ryan's body. The group sat there in disbelief. Andre tried his best to keep everyone calm, but it was too late for that. We hadn't even noticed, but in the midst of Casey's meltdown, her boyfriend Dustin laid there, unresponsive. A mixture of foam and blood poured from his eyes and mouth. I looked at Giovanna, expecting to have to comfort her, but she was taking all of this really well. Maybe too well. Andre looked at the remaining campers and said firmly not to go near the bodies. Chris and Dan, 2 of the older backpackers that were with us, suggested that maybe we should consider leaving altogether, taking our chances on the trail instead of waiting to die on this mountain. Andre intervened by saying it was far too dangerous to try to do this at night. I quietly asked Giovanna what she wanted to do. It felt like this was quickly becoming an every man for themselves situation. How much faith did she have in Andre to do the right thing? To my surprise, Giovanna looked at me with those beautiful green eyes, smiled, and said reassuringly that everything would be okay. Then she leaned in for a quick kiss, which under these circumstances felt oddly comforting. It was settled. Chris and Dan had decided to take their chances by hiking back through the woods at night. Andre did everything he could to persuade them to stay, but it was no use. Andre stepped aside as he watched the two men grab their packs and leave. They didn't even bother to tear down their tents. They just left. What little light we could see from their headlamps was gone shortly after they departed. Andre plopped down in a camping chair as silence fell over the camp once again. The crackling of the fire tried its best to drown out our inner thoughts, but it proved to be useless. Andre sipped what little scotch he had remaining in his flask. By this point, we all had a drink in our hands as we awaited our fate. It felt inevitable at this point. I couldn't recall the names of the other couple, but they said they were going to try and sleep. I'm not sure anyone believed that, but who are we to judge at a time like this? What started out as a fun getaway weekend turned into a scene from a horror film. Miles away from our cars and even further away from civilization, we sat on top of a mountain with 3 dead bodies just a few feet from our camp. Dustin's body was never even moved. Everyone was afraid to touch it after we saw what happened with Casey. Andre took the final sips of scotch from his flask, raised it up to us in a cheers type manner, and retired to his tent. I felt a hand on my back as Giovanna tried her best to comfort me. Shouldn't I be the one comforting her? Why was she taking this so well? Why didn't this affect her more? I tried to not think about it, but I'd be lying if I said the thought stayed away. I looked into those green eyes, and she suggested that we should try to get some sleep as well. I nodded, knowing full well that I wouldn't be sleeping at all tonight. She gave me a kiss and retired to her tent. I took one last look at the fire, unsure if I'd make it back out of my tent, alive. This was all so hard to comprehend. I tried my best to settle into the hammock, all the while wondering what the night had in store for me. Twig. Ah! I almost fell out of my hammock as I heard a distant scream. I couldn't tell for sure, but I had a feeling it came from Chris or Dan. I poked my head out to see if anyone else had been disturbed by what I had just heard. No one moved. I stared in the direction of Giovanna's tent. I could barely see the outline as the fire had died down almost entirely. A few beams of light from the moon began to cut through, but not enough to see well. Did no one else hear that? Was I just more tired than I realized? Did I imagine it? My heart started racing as I tucked my head back inside the tent. Something was moving towards our camp. The sound of twigs snapping beneath its weight grew closer with each step. I began imagining the worst-case scenarios. Was it whatever Chris and Dan just encountered? Was it one of them, mad with this mysterious disease going around? Or was it this bear? We had had our bear bag tied up high enough away from camp, so it shouldn't be coming for us. Nonetheless, the thought of encountering a bear in the middle of the night was almost enough to cause me to panic. Surely I wasn't the only one hearing this now. The creature made its way even closer to our camp. Suddenly, it dawned on me. The bodies. It's coming for the fucking bodies. What the fuck was I gonna do? What were we going to do? Defend a dead body against a hungry bear? It was too late. The creature had finally made its way into our camp. I could hear the breathing of this thing now. A fraction of an inch of nylon was all that separated me from the heavy breathing. I was now hearing it right outside of my tent. A fraction of an inch of nylon was all that separated me from the heavy breathing I was now hearing outside of my tent. The snapping of the twigs stopped as I heard it investigate the clearing that was our campsite. I laid in my hammock, hoping against all hope that I wouldn't be noticed and that this animal would just move on. Suddenly, a paw brushed past my hammock. Fuck, I thought to myself. How much longer do I just sit here? Playing dead is the best move, right? That's what they say anyway. I was so fucking scared. The creature knew something was here. Now. I felt the snout nudge my leg from below. It was sizing me up. I gripped my knife in my hand as hard as I could, ready to strike, in case this thing came through the tent. But before any of that happened, I heard it move away from my tent. I so badly wanted to see what this animal looked like. Before another thought could enter my head, I felt a sharp pain in my leg, followed by a warm, wet feeling. Fuck! I screamed. I'd been bitten. I kicked and flailed to get this thing off of me. The excitement caused my hammock to plummet to the ground, knocking the wind out of me. I couldn't get out fast enough to try and defend myself, but the creature didn't come back. I finally managed to get myself out of the tent. I frantically looked around for this creature, shining the flashlight towards Giovanni's. I noticed it was open. I looked to the other side of the camp and saw their tents were also open. Fear began to consume me as I presumed I was now alone on this mountain. Help! I screamed. My adrenaline was flying. The pain from the bite was absent from my mind. I shined the flashlight on my leg to look at the wound, to reveal blood had begun soaking my sock. Giovanna! Andre! I screamed, hoping to hear someone call back to me. I knew there was a creature nearby, but I didn't care. If it was going to come back for me, so be it. I didn't want to be alone. Where the fuck was everyone? I couldn't recall hearing anyone get out of their tent. Giovanna and I were the last to go to bed. We would have heard them. If she left, why didn't she wake me up? The sound of a twig snapping behind me caused me to turn around and quickly shine my light in the direction of the sound. I could not believe what I was looking at. 5 creatures that stood at least 8 feet tall glared back at me. Their eyes reflected like that of a dog at night, with long, dark hair and arms that hung down to their knees. These things resembled some sort of wolf. Was I looking at a fucking werewolf? Do these things actually exist? I glanced up through the trees to look at the moon, and to my surprise it was full. I made sure to keep an eye on them, as I wasn't sure what to expect. Now having seemingly lost interest in me, 4 of them began to feast on Ryan's body. One of them made its way over to me. I wanted to run, but I was truly frozen with fear. The massive beast dropped down on all 4s to stare me right in the face. Even on all 4s, this thing was massive. Its hot, rotten breath was almost enough to make me puke, but I tried as best as I could not to move. I was outnumbered, and something told me that if these things wanted me dead, they'd have done it already. Its cold nose sniffed at my chest, then worked its way down to my legs. I had never felt so intimidated in my entire life. I felt its warm tongue lick my wound. Strangely enough, it didn't feel as though it was trying to harm me. This felt more nurturing in nature. However unsettling this was, I tried my best to remain calm. The massive wolf-like beast rose back up and stared me in the eyes. Now inches from my face, I noticed something. They were green. That same shade of green that I had come to love. Was this Giovanna? Now, staring right through me, as if it knew me, I no longer felt like I was in danger. The beast brushed past me and moved towards the other side of the campsite where Dustin's body lay. I had been too wrapped up in the moment to understand what was happening. The sound of flesh tearing from bones filled the previously quiet campsite. Like wild animals on a fresh kill, these beasts were ravenous. Their powerful jaws tearing through organs made a disgusting squelching noise. It was stomach-turning, and I couldn't hold it anymore. I ran towards the wood line to throw up. I heard one of them snarl at me, but I didn't care. I was going to throw up. After I spewed my dinner all over a nearby tree, I felt something hit the back of my head, and that was it. Tennessee. The EMT said it was a miracle I survived the night without proper shelter. They were accompanying Jerry when they all came across my body along the path the group had taken to get to the campsite initially. Yesterday, I woke up to the annoying beeps coming from the monitor that I found myself hooked up to at a local hospital. By local, I mean about an hour away from where we had parked the car. It has been a few days before I regained consciousness. Luckily, when I awoke, sitting next to me with my hand in hers was Giovanna. Her and Jerry had been instrumental in getting me out safely. You see, after their feast, they carried me closer to the trailhead. Gary never went for help. He knew that the water was tainted. They all did. They were werewolves. This backpacking group that they run is the perfect cover for them to feast every few weeks. The idea is to lure unsuspecting victims deep into the wilderness, away from other potential campers. Day 2 of the trip, they contaminated the water supply with their saliva. Most people can't handle it, so they normally suffer the same fate as Ryan, Dustin, and Casey did. At the end of the trip, it just looks like some wild animal had gotten a hold of the campers. No one was the wiser. I know what you're thinking. If the people that camp with the same group go missing every time they go camping with them, surely the police would catch on something was off, right? They don't kill people every time. I came to find out this was some sort of a recruitment process. I learned some folks are immune to it. If you don't show any symptoms after being exposed to their saliva, you're able to be recruited. After that, all that's required is a bite from one of them after they've transformed. And that's it. That's how I became a werewolf. I've never felt more alive in my life. I felt strong. Giovanna and I have never been happier. I've even mended things with my ex, so much so that we've become friends again. They moved back not too long ago, now that a new man was done with school. I know he's an outdoorsy kinds of guy. I told her I know a great group of folks to go camping with, and that they should tag along sometimes. We're headed to Tennessee in March. Hey everyone, this is Jay Taylor from Dantes Disciples. Hope you enjoyed that story. Unfortunately, it's going to be a little more time in between my uploads. I'm in the process of moving, and my new apartment that I moved into is incredibly noisy. The traffic from the street radiates all throughout the night, and there are not one, but 2 babies that cry periodically throughout the night. So I'm actually going to be relocating to a new apartment in a couple weeks, and I'll begin uploading regularly. I want to thank everyone for listening, and I appreciate you sharing and your comments. And again, if you have any great stories to share, then I'm sure we'd love to have them read on Dante's Disciple. Take care.